Hello, Leapers. Welcome to the Quantum Leap podcast. I'm Matt Dale. Now, on the podcast, we regularly talk about the classic series, and we talk all the time about the new series, but it's so rare that we talk about what happened in between. And I'm really excited today because here to help us shine a light on a key part of that era is accomplished writer and producer Trey Callaway. Trey, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Matt.
Thanks so much for coming on. Now, for those of you that don't know the name in terms of the Quantum Leap link, Trey had a pilot script in production in the early 2000s called A Bold Leap Forward, and that would have been a resurrection for the Sci-Fi Channel of Quantum Leap. It would have seen Sammy Jo Beckett stepping into the Quantum Leap accelerator to track down her father. It's a fantastic script. I got the chance to read it back when I was researching for the first edition of my book about 7 years ago. I have been dying to speak to Trey ever since, so I'm really, really glad to have you here. And why don't we dive right in? Can you tell me, I assume to have got involved in a project like this, you had to have been a fan of Quantum Leap originally. Were you a fan of the show in the 90s? What was your introduction to all of that world?
I was absolutely a fan of the original series and watched most, if not all, of its episodes, but definitely was not only a fan, but as a writer working in Hollywood. It was funny because I lost track of how many times in meetings I would have with studio executives or network executives. I lost track of how many times that one of two scenarios would happen. Either I would pitch some kind of anthology series and they would say, that's really great. If only it were Quantum Leap. Like we would really, or I would, I would be brought in to develop ideas for different, anthology series of sorts. And again, the same name would be raised. This is great. We really love this. What we're really looking for is another Quantum Leap. And so you hear that enough times, and then you just start thinking to yourself, well, why can't we just reboot Quantum Leap already, right? So I had kind of filed that away in my head, and up to that point, I don't think if I knew anyone who had worked on the original series, I don't think I did. But it was something that just in the back of my mind, I always thought, gosh, as a fan of the show, I would really love to see a reboot of that and to sort of have an opportunity to pick up the torch and carry it. And then all of a sudden, maybe in a be careful what you wish for scenario, I got a phone call. My agents got a phone call gauging my interest in potentially coming in to pitch ideas to Sci-Fi for a potential relaunch of Quantum Leap. So I went in and I met with them first, and they made clear to me what they were hoping to do, which was to create an original 2-hour movie, a backdoor pilot into a relaunch of the series, and that they were partnered with USA Cable, which is an extension of Universal, and they wanted to know if I was interested, and I said absolutely, and they said, well, great. This is. They kind of gave me the lay of the land in that 2-hour backdoor pilot. They wanted to sort of have a writer create new machinery for a new engine to drive the series moving forward. They told me right up front that Scott Bakula would probably not be available for this particular relaunch, and if so, it would only be for that pilot film. And so I knew that about the architecture moving forward, and they made it clear to me that they wanted to have at least 2 leaps inside of this 2-hour movie, and ideally, it would be great if one of those leaps could just be a fun romp, and the other leap could be a little more weighty in its subject matter. And so, with that information, I went off to sort of try and put my thoughts together, and I did. And I came back to them with a pitch for how I would approach the material, which they absolutely loved. And then it took a few unexpected turns from there.
Well, I'm really intrigued. Even just going back before that, you were approached for this. Now at the time, if I'm right in thinking, at that point you were known for writing a couple of your own things. I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, Lost in Oz. Not going into somebody else's universe and creating a reboot with you've just mentioned a lot of tick boxes that you were given, and maybe it's because I don't know how those other projects that you were involved in at the time started, but I imagine you had a lot more creative freedom. So what do you think caused them to approach you, and how did you feel about being approached with, all right, here's what we want you to do, and do this?
Well, it might have been in part because of I Still Know, which of course was a sequel. So
True.
that speaks to an ability to sort of carry a torch forward. But also, I had worked, I had created a series called Mercy Point, which was short-lived, but it was a big science fiction project that we shot in Vancouver, and I'd had some interactivity with some of the sci-fi people as a result coming out of that. And
that was the ER in space kind of thing, right?
That's the way the critics often describe it. Yeah.
I'm sorry if that was a cliche, but yes.
Oh, no, it's fine. I listen, I would have been happy to have the success of ER. The series starred Joe Morton. I inherited the crew from the X-Files, and it was a big, very expensive, ambitious sci-fi medical hybrid drama that was probably, in retrospect, I mean, it had a few things working against it. It was on UPN, which was always sort of a struggling network of sorts. It was developed to be a companion piece to Star Trek Voyager, and if that had in fact been the case, I might still be on the air today. But the affiliates had a big revolt that season and wanted a lot of programming for young teen women, and we didn't fit that mold. And then we debuted against the highest rated World Series in history up to that point. So all sorts of factors there, but that's not what we're here to talk about. But I think the combo of the sci-fi and the influences or ability there, and then again the sort of being able to carry a story forward, albeit in the horror genre with I Still Know, that probably put me on some radars. And I'm sure this was, because it was a coveted piece of intellectual property that the studio owned, I'm sure I was not by far the only writer to be approached with this material. That's usually the case in Hollywood. But, the good news is the take that I came back into USA Cable and to Sci-Fi with, both of those entities were really excited about. They felt like, this notion of having Al remain for the new series, setting up that Sam is still out there leaping about, but then drawing directly from the canon to introduce this character of Sammy Jo and let her be our young female lead, working in cahoots with Al to not only leap into people's lives and carry out that torch forward, but to create this longer ranging arc of a girl in search for her father and trying to save her father. That clicked with them. And what also, it didn't surprise me. I mean, there's a total of 4 leaps in the script. There's a script that opens it, which is sort of a teaser in which we do get to see a brief cameo from Sam. And then there is that lighter-hearted leap, which they were looking for, which in this case was a leap into 1985 and the reality of the concert spectacular known as Live Aid. And then there was a third, much weightier leap into the body of a security guard who's just been fired for being too alarmist on September 10th of 2011, so a day before the 9/11 attacks. And then there's a fourth brief leap in the close that takes us back to the 1980 Olympic Games. But they really loved it. They loved the pitch. They loved the machinery behind, how I wanted to carry the show forward. And And so then there was one not last, but one new hurdle that I had to clear, which was since both studio entities, or the network Sci-Fi and the studio USA, was really happy with my pitch. I had one more ring to kiss, as they informed me, and that was the ring of Don Belisario himself, the creator of the series. And so he was not someone I had ever met prior. His legend certainly preceded him, and I knew lots of people who had worked for him, but I had never had the privilege of meeting him. So a meeting was set, and the good news is the studio and the network were kind of my advance men in that process. They made it clear to Don that I had come up with a take that both of them really, really liked. But I had to go and give him my spin in a slightly more brief form, less detailed than I had given the other folks. But nonetheless, he wanted to hear it, but I think it was more about giving him the confidence that I was a storyteller with the passion and the skills that made me capable of carrying out the task. And so the first surprise in that process was going to meet with Don Belisario, who at the time had an office at a small but historic lot in Hollywood called Sunset Gower. And I think I had been to Sunset Gower a few times. It was a little bit run down, but again, very historic. And the first surprise was in pulling into the parking lot. I went through the security gate. I was told where to park. I parked in the lot that I was given. And as I opened the door to my car and looked down to the pavement to step out, 3 $100 bills. Two were sitting there. A third one kind of was starting to blow by. And I looked down and I saw a wad of cash, basically. And I got out of my car and I looked around, wondering if I was being punked in some way. But in fact, there was no one anywhere around me. And so in that moment, I laughed to myself because I thought, well, even if I don't get this gig, I've essentially been paid to take the meeting. And so, like any good self-respecting Hollywood writer, I picked up those $300 and put them in my pocket. So I felt like I was already ahead of the game. That was surprise number one. And then I went to Don's office, which I'll never forget because I don't know if I wouldn't suggest that this was by design, but it was a very intimidating space to walk into, in that his entire office was ringed with all of the awards that he had won. So you were walking into a hall of triumph, and you were immediately and very visually informed about someone's success and where you were in the pecking order. So that was slightly intimidating, but he couldn't have been warmer, and he acknowledged right up front that, like, well, I'm hearing from the suits, as it were, that you've got a great take on this, and and so he wanted to hear it. Well, he wanted to hear about myself first, so I told him a little about myself, and then he wanted to know what my take was, and I gave it to him. And he was clearly engaged. He was enthusiastic about it, and he said, "Well, great. Go with God. You've got my blessing." And those are the bosses in charge. But I appreciate you taking the time to come and give me a sense of what you're thinking. And I really felt at that moment like this was a guy who had, I think at the time, 2 shows on the air at the same time. I think JAG was still on and NCIS was on. And he was a very busy guy. And so I knew the sense that I had was twofold. One, that he was very busy, and two, that he was too busy to really pay a lot of close attention to a reboot of Quantum Leap at that point. Not that he wouldn't have been involved, but just I got the sense that, like, yeah, I was going to be getting most of my marching orders from the studio and the network. So, and that's fine. I was used to that process. And so then off I went. and I wrote the 2-hour pilot. And I have to say, I really enjoyed it. The process of doing it. It was fun to sort of, again, carry that torch for Sam and Al. It was also really fun to breathe new life into the creation of this character of Sammy Joe. It was, the first of the two major leaps, excluding the teaser and the epilogue leaps. The first of the two major leaps was fun for me as well, not just because I'm a music fan, always have been, and a big fan of concerts. Live Aid is one of those that I missed, sadly. I watched it on TV with most of the rest of the world. And so, but I'd never gotten to be there in person. So it was fun to sort of place myself there. And it was inspired, at least, I don't know that I can call this a spoiler alert, since none of your listeners and viewers will have read the script the way you have, because you're on a very short list of people who have read the script. But Sammy Joe jumps into the into the body of a teenage girl who's in a terrible relationship she shouldn't be in. And long story short, when her ugly boyfriend is arrested, she recognizes through a series of circumstances that the guy she's really meant to be with is inside the Live Aid concert, and she's in the parking lot outside. So she and Al have to conspire to figure out how to get her in there. And then in a crowd of 100,000 plus people, she has to find this guy she's supposed to be with. And that culminates in her literally making her way onto the stage in the middle of performances and interrupting rock stars, one of whom is the 80s legend Rick Springfield. And he's not there by accident. He's there because I had just met with him a few months prior for a project. And ultimately, we weren't able to make it work for that project. But in the back of my mind, I was already thinking about Quantum Leap things. And I thought, God, this is great. He's still around. I'm going to put him on stage. And
you would have had him play his younger self.
Would have had him play
Chucky Checker style. Nice.
And then, of course, by design, his immortal classic Jesse's Girl plays directly into the narrative. So,
yeah.
So that was really fun to execute. And, and then the second leap into the body of a Pakistani security guard on the eve of 9/11 was also, that's literally playing on hollowed ground. And I think my favorite part about working on that particular story was, being very mindful of the pain and the gravitas of that story, being very respectful of that event. But it gave me, in a weird way, a perfect opportunity to stay true to, I think, the spirit of the original series. And I think Al has, look, I'm the worst at remembering my own dialogue, and this is many years ago. So, but if I recall correctly, there's a line somewhere in there where Al says to Sammy Joe, in so many words, it's the notion of if you want to make a big difference in people's lives, you have to focus on just that, the people. And to me, that was a hallmark of the original series that I really always connected with. And so, this security guard has to go through this process of recognizing Sammy Joe, more importantly, has to go through this process of recognizing that she cannot stop the fateful events that are going to happen 24 hours from now, but she does have a very, very important role to fill in reuniting a family. And so that was really interesting. It was challenging, but ultimately really satisfying to work on.
And I don't think we've really fully set the scene in terms of the timeline of all this. This was so I gather the rumors of this started around 2002, and the script that I've seen was dated 2003. Yeah. So this 9/11 was a very recent memory. So yeah, that was a brave choice. It must have been very, very tough to write.
It was very tough to write, and you're right. The paint was still very, very fresh, and And so I'll be honest, when I went in to pitch it initially, I thought it's probably not going to fly, and I had backup ideas at the ready. But I think the studio and the network, both to their credit, recognized that no, that was true to the spirit of the original series. And as long as we were not going to make it about, recreating the horrors of that day, and we were going to keep our cameras aimed elsewhere and let the theater of the mind and people's very recent memories carry the weight of that tragedy, then we would be in the right place. And so yeah, I credit where it's due. They were very supportive of that, and so was Don. So then, yeah, I wrote the script and I turned it in the studio and the network, and then I was very pleased to hear back from both of them that it was exactly what they were looking for. They were really excited about it, and Sci-Fi in particular, who was still relatively new at that point on the scene, they were really they wanted to get really aggressive about production. And I don't remember, it may be on the script that you have. If it says 2003, maybe it even gives you a month.
June, July.
Okay, so that sounds about right, because I remember then what they were saying to me was, could you be ready to shoot in Australia, is where they wanted to shoot. Could you be ready to shoot in Australia as early as September, October? So, of course, the only answer there is yes. The understanding contractually and otherwise was that I was going to be producing this thing as well and functioning as the showrunner moving forward. And so, what they wanted to know that I was available immediately, and the only thing that they were waiting on was hearing from Mr. Belisario what his reaction to the material was. And I think he was traveling at the time, so there was a little bit of a lag, a week or so, 2 maybe at the outside. And then a meeting was set for me to have lunch with Don. And this is where I should preface everything I say next with the fact that, and it's fun because I haven't thought about this project in so many years, Matt, and I really appreciate the opportunity to go back, because it's not often, at least it's not often, that I go back to this kind of old material. I'm one of those people who always has my eyes focused on what's next. And I'm also, I should say, a huge fan. Stephen Lillian and Brian Winbrandt, who co-created and run the new show, are friends of mine. We've worked together. We worked together for a number of seasons on CSI New York, and have stayed in touch. And saw them both on the strike lines over this past summer, and so I remain a fan of the series to this day in its new incarnation as well. And I think it's great what they've done with it. But this is one of those moments that I'm about to talk about where I don't know a writer in this business who doesn't have some version of this kind of story to tell. And it's maybe only vexing for me because, look, I've worked in all kinds of genres. I've written Westerns and horror and sci-fi and action comedy and serialized soap and animation. And, I'm sure a good shrink could point to the common threads in all of it. But I am one of those writers who likes to mix it up and tell different kinds of stories. But this is a very common story in most working writers' careers, which is that you have these, hopefully it's only one, and I think this is one of the only ones for me, and it's probably the biggest one. You'll have a job that becomes a mystery to you and vexes you for the entirety of the rest of your career. And that's probably it's probably more challenging for someone like me who's actually written mysteries before. I know how to do that, but I can control those things on the page, but I can't control real life, right? Which is the curse of every real writer. Okay, so with that set up, I go and I have lunch with Mr. Belisario, and it's a very nice lunch. in a very nice restaurant. And he sits across from me, across the white linen table from me. And he spends, I'm going to say, 45 solid minutes of the lunch extolling the virtues of my script. Really, really quelling over the choices that I'd made, the way I had honored the characters and the concept. Really made me feel good, to be honest. And it really mattered to me what he had to say about this. And he couldn't have been more complimentary. And then he said, I want to give you a couple of adjustments. And he was careful to use that term. And it's always stuck in my mind. He said, I don't think of these as notes. They're really adjustments. And the adjustments that he gave me were about some relatively arcane details in the original series that I'm not sure even a true fan, an audience member who'd watched every episode would necessarily have retained. This is the kind of information that only if you had been directly responsible for writing and producing the show, you would probably know. But they were helpful nonetheless. You know, it was little details about years and names and times, and it was clear that he had a very strong memory of those details, and he wanted to make sure that I got them right, because in a show about time travel, that's important. So I wrote all that down dutifully at the table, and and then the last thing he said at the end of our lunch was, well, great, man. I got to tell you, you've made this job easy for me, because I got a lot going on right now, and I don't really have time to focus on this. So go work with those guys again. Go find a director. Do you have any directors in mind? And I did. I spoke to him about some director possibilities. And he said, great. Well, they're obviously motivated. They want to get this ball rolling. They want you to go shoot. So, I'll stay in the loop, but job well done. Go knock it out of the park. So when I tell you I kind of floated out of that restaurant, I did. Because I felt like, well, there you go. There's 3 in a row. I pleased the studio, I pleased the network, and I pleased the creator of the series. And so I then excitedly started making calls to directors, checking availability on people, doing my homework about Australia and production there. And about 2 weeks later is when the mystery begins. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from my agents at the time, who said, what happened with Quantum Leap? I said, well, I'm in the middle of meeting with directors and working through details with studio and network on production. And then it was explained to me that all of that was going to be put on hold, because Don had called the president at Sci-Fi to say he wanted to bring in a couple of writers who had worked on JAG to start over on the Quantum Leap 2-hour pilot movie. And at first I thought this was a joke, to be honest. But it wasn't. And so then I wound up speaking with the powers that be at Sci-Fi, where it was explained to me that for reasons which confused them and vexed them, Don had some kind of change of heart and had reached out and to the network directly and said he wanted to start over and he wanted to bring in a couple of JAG writers. And the network's response was, but we're really happy with what Trey has done, and the studio is really happy with what Trey has done. And by all accounts and measurements, you're really happy with what Trey has done. And, we've paid him already to do this, and we don't have an appetite to pay anybody else to do it. So if you want to rewrite it for any reason, or you feel a need to rewrite it, of course, that's your prerogative as the creator, and we have a deal with you. But otherwise, we're not motivated to start over again. And that, my friend, is where the project died. I I never heard another word about it. If another draft was generated by him or anybody else, it never saw the light of day. And it's one of those great mysteries where part of me wanted to reach back out to him directly and say, was I high? Was I drunk? Did I miss something? But it wasn't worth it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I certainly didn't. It was always his prerogative. It's one of his babies. I was honored to be invited to the table and to try and carry that torch forward. Uh, Creative artists, myself included, change their minds all the time. Who knows what any of his reasons were uh, for arriving at this decision, but it ultimately died there. And then it was kind of frustrating. I mean, look, at the whole thing was kind of shocking and painful for me just to have gotten that excited about it. But I think what was harder for me ultimately was that in some ways was that the script, and I still don't know how this happened, but the script had leaked online. And I remember, what's the guy's name? Harry Knowles, the Ain't It Cool website, got a hold of it and gave it rave reviews and detailed analysis of the story and script. And then I started getting, calls for interviews, and I didn't want to talk about it. Right. And I'm willing to talk about it now, many years later, because I've obviously moved on. But your call about coming to speak with you on your podcast about it finally just sort of brought a lot of it back, and it really gave me an opportunity to, especially as someone who's run shows of my own, like you can't always point to a definitive reason why people change their minds, why artists change their minds. I have painter friends who will paint what I consider to be a beautiful painting, only to then paint over the entire canvas and start over again. And so it's incredibly subjective. And so at the end of the day, I was pleased and proud to have been asked, like I said, to the table, and I was pleased and proud of what I managed to create. And the fact that it never saw the light of day, maybe that ultimately cleared the path in a way that wouldn't have existed for my friends Steven and Brian to have their run at the Reboot. And I've kept working, and I'm sure Don is enjoying retirement, and life goes on.
Yeah, you've had obviously plenty of your own successes. I'm just I thank you for sharing all that, because that I felt that as you were just going through that. Yes.
So it was a bold leap forward in a variety of ways, but ultimately didn't stick the landing.
I am intrigued by this. This was obviously such a tight turnaround. Yeah, I've just checked the script that I saw, which is probably the same script that Harry saw, was in June, and you're saying that they were hoping to film a few months later. If you're able or willing to talk about it, and I understand if you don't, had you got as far as thinking about casting for Sammy Joe? You said you were looking at directors as well. Is there any names that you're willing to share in terms of who you were thinking, or?
Yeah, no, look, I had met with a few different directors and really was zeroing in on a dear friend of mine, Michael Cattleman, who had actually directed the pilot of Mercy Point and was the producing director for that series. And we've remained close over all these many years. And he was somebody who is not only an extremely skilled and talented director, but someone who, like me, has a deep thirst for adventure. And so I thought, well, if anybody could hit the ground running with me, it would be him. So he was the first name that I brought up to Don at the table, and Don was familiar with his work and thought it was a good call. And so he had been talking with me a lot about the project, but we had not gotten, thankfully, as far as casting, because that would have been, painful for those folks involved too. So we hadn't gotten there yet because it was just a couple of weeks outside of this this wonderfully positive meeting or series of meetings. But yeah, that's as far as it got, my friend. And then the script sat there. And then it's funny, I was a few years ago, I was one of the producers of Station 19, which is a successful spin-off of Grey's Anatomy here in the States that I think is in its 7th season now. And fire rescue show, and one of my co-writers on that series, or colleagues on that series, was a huge Quantum Leap fan, and he had heard about the legend of this 2-hour pilot film, and so he was like, "Do you still have that script? Could I read it?" I said, "Yeah," and that was actually the first time in many years that I had taken it out and blown the dust off, and I gave it to him, and he was incredibly effusive, kind of a tough critic too in general in the room, but like he was incredibly effusive after he read it, which was heartening because I hadn't read it myself in many years, and that was my first opportunity, or the first opportunity I had taken to go back and reread it, and it's sort of like going back to visit with an old girlfriend that you were once in love with and hadn't seen in years. You run into them at the grocery store, and so that was a positive experience. And so, again, when you called for this, I was like, yeah, sure. Let's talk.
Yeah.
Statute of limitations. I'll go ahead and tell the real story for the first time.
Thank you for sharing it. And yeah, take it from this fan as well. I love the script as well. I read it in 2016. I was researching for a book, and at that point it looked like Quantum Leap was never coming back. And then when I discovered this and read the script, I thought it could have done. It really could have done, and this could have been the launching pad. So things work out for a reason, though, and you have clearly gone on to so many amazing projects. I would love to know maybe a couple of the highlights of your career over the last couple of decades since then, and also really what you've got coming up, because I know you've got some other projects coming up. I know the fans would love to hear what you're up to now and see where they can track down your current work.
Well, thank you. Well, when I'm not watching the new reboot of Quantum Leap, I am as a fan, once and always fan, I have continued working a lot through the years, and have worked on since then. I was 6 years and 130 episodes of CSI New York and Revolution, the science fiction drama on NBC, and Supernatural, long-running series where I created the Ghost Facers. APB was a series I ran for Fox, which was sort of a high-concept crime drama, and I ran a serialized genre-driven soap called The Messengers on the CW. Most recently, I was one of the executive producers of 911 Lone Star. I've also been doing a huge amount of international work for Imagine and for Amazon and for Netflix, working with a variety of filmmakers in 10 different countries, helping them launch their shows. I am a professor of almost 18 years at the School of Cinematic Arts at the University of Southern California. So I've been doing that for quite a while now too. And right now I am working on a new pilot for Netflix, which I would love to tell you more, but I'm not allowed to. It's based on a best-selling novel. I can say that much. And I'm also working on a project based on something written by the extraordinary novelist Stephen King. So I would love to tell you more about that when I can, but got to keep my mouth closed for now. But staying very, very busy, and at this point, I think I've written and sold 24 pilots or so, but you have given me the gift of allowing me to go back to one of those, and even though it didn't end the way I would have dreamed it would end, or maybe the fans would have dreamed it would end, like I said, I'm delighted with the way the work turned out, and I remain happy with the experience of having at least gotten as far as I did. So, maybe in an alternative universe somewhere, I'll have an opportunity to leap into what might have been if this had actually relaunched the series back in 2003 instead of present day.
Well, you have given us the gift of half an hour of a truly unique insight, and I thank you so much for your time and for being so open and honest about your experiences. It's been fascinating and a genuine joy to talk to you. So, Trey, thank you for spending time with us on the show today.
My absolute pleasure. Keep leaping.